Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Anthology presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. If this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast exploring science fiction anthology storytelling during television's first golden age, beginning with The Twilight Zone. But in honor of Black Mirror's new season that premiered on Netflix on October 21st, I'm covering each episode of Charlie Brooker's technophobic sci-fi anthology series in this bonus episode series. You can find more of Anthology at anthologypod.com, and if you want to contact me, you can use the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod. You can tweet me at ObsessiveViewer. You can send an email to matt@obsessiveviewer.com, or you can call and leave me a voicemail at 317-762-6099. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, the easiest way to do that is to head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. The more ratings and reviews I get, the easier it will be for people to find the show in iTunes' search results, and it'll help me climb the highly competitive TV and film category of podcasts. And if you're feeling particularly generous and want to show your support with your wallet, you can do that by clicking the donate button on anthologypod.com or the donate link in the show notes of this episode. That link will take you to PayPal, where you can just make a donation via PayPal or a credit card. And it's a one-time donation. Any donations made will help pay the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. Today on the podcast, I'll be discussing Playtest. It's the second episode of Black Mirror's third season that premiered on October 21st, 2016, as I said before, on Netflix. And I recently switched to just brief IMDb summaries for the episodes. So the plot summary for Playtest is: an American traveler short on cash signs up to test a revolutionary new gaming system, only to discover the thrills are a little too real. So this episode stars Wyatt Russell as Cooper. He's Kurt Russell's son with Goldie Hawn. You may have seen him in 22 Jump Street, Cowboys and Aliens, and most recently in Everybody Wants Some, the Richard Linklater film. And this episode also stars Hannah John Kamen as Sonia. She was previously in 15 Million Merits, actually, as Selma Telsey. Or I think it's Selma Tels. Anyway, she was one of the contestants on Hot Shots that won. It's kind of in the ad roll when they show all the people that have won Hot Shots or been on Hot Shots. I think she may have been like the star of it. I can't really remember. My memory's a little fuzzy on that. And according to IMDb, and this isn't necessarily confirmed or anything because it's IMDb and that's not from a press release or anything, but she has a credit for a season 4 episode of Black Mirror. So she must be in good with the team over at Black Mirror. And she was also in The Force Awakens, but I mean her character was listed as First Order officer, so I don't know what exact role she was or how prominent she was in the movie. And rounding out the cast is, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Wunmi Musaku as Katie. She was in Batman v Superman recently, but I honestly don't remember her in the movie at all. Yeah, and I mean, I had some very strong opinions about that movie, so I didn't go back to revisit it or anything, so I don't have it really fresh in my mind, but yeah, she was apparently in that movie. Writer for this episode was Charlie Brooker, and the director was Dan Trachtenberg, who just recently directed his feature film directorial debut, 10 Cloverfield Lane, which came out to high praise, and I was a huge fan of it, and a huge fan of the marketing of it, and it kind of ties in well with Black Mirror and the Twilight Zone, and essentially what I'm doing here at Anthology, in that it took the title of Cloverfield, and what they've done with it is they have created this brand that is somewhat like its own anthology formatted movie series. And it's going to be coming out with a movie called God Particle, I think next year. That's also going to be connected to the Cloverfield brand. So I'm pretty excited for that. And people might know Dan Trachtenberg from the Totally Rad Show, which was, I'm not, it was a It was a web show. I didn't watch much of it. I've seen a little bit here and there, but I'm a big fan of what Dan Trachtenberg did with 10 Cloverfield Lane, and he's obviously a guest, not frequent guest, but he's been on one of the podcasts I listen to all the time, /Filmcast, and it's always awesome to hear him on that. Okay, so I'm going to go into my review here, but just so you guys know, I'm of course going to be spoiling the episode from here moving forward. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, turn this off, go to Netflix, watch the episode, and come back and listen. So as I said when I reviewed Nosedive, I went through this season once, just a dry run, just watching it, just experiencing it for the first time. And then I went through it a second time and took notes throughout it. So my initial thoughts on Playtest as I watched it the first time, after I watched it that first time, was that I really like the concept of VR and implanted video gaming. And I think the idea of using a person's mind and fears against them for gaming purposes is really unique. But what I like the most in this episode is Cooper's true fear, the loss of memory after his father's death, and the sequence where he comes home is such a gut punch and hard to watch, and I'll talk about that in my review. But I think in that first viewing, my initial thoughts on it, I think the episode faltered a little bit when it came to sticking the landing, and it becomes a little too twisty, and revealing that it was all in his head and took place over less than a second was kind of disappointing, but it reminded me of the Twilight Zone episode, Perchance to Dream. So those were my initial thoughts, and then I went through and I watched it again, and I went ahead and took notes, and that's going to be the content, that's going to be the bulk of my review here. So let's see if my opinion changed at all with that repeat viewing. So right from the outset on this episode, we're introduced to Wyatt Russell's character, Cooper, and we see that he's running away from his home, essentially. Not running away in the child running away sense necessarily. He's running away in the sense that he's running away from his fear and responsibility and the can of worms that is waiting for him. And in that respect, he's kind of selfish. And I mean, the script keeps him pretty selfish, or the script doesn't forgive him for that sin of leaving his mother alone after that and ignoring her. The script doesn't forgive him for that. So he is pretty selfish, but he becomes a likable character, and I'll talk about that here in a bit. But I do want to mention that when he leaves the house and he has his bag, he puts it in the back of the car, then he gets in the back of the car and then drives off. And when I saw that, I just thought it's pretty funny that we live in a world where a character in a movie or TV show today can get into the back of a stranger's car, and that doesn't require a scene or dialogue referencing who the driver is. Like, it doesn't reference, we're not asking the question of who's picking him up to take him to the airport, because it's just Uber or Lyft. I think it's just funny that we live in a world like that, and that's kind of changed in some small ways the way that films are written now. And something I picked up on a lot in the second viewing was that there's quite a bit of little foreshadowing and little moments that kind of call toward something at the things that happen later in the episode. In particular, the in-flight movie is pretty. The scene with him on the plane is pretty clever, and I really enjoyed it, because he is playing a game and he looks up, and the in-flight movie has just a giant spider just scaling a building in New York or a city. I don't know if it was New York, but I just like that that's in his head. That seems like it's kind of implanting that image in his head. And that's a nice bit of foreshadowing. And then like that's clever in and of itself, and that's a fun little thing that you can reference. But then it takes a darker turn with a more dark bit of foreshadowing, because the flight attendant stops him and tells him that he needs to turn off the phone because it's going to interfere with the instruments, which is just awesome to see after you see what happens at the end of this episode. And there's a pretty cool montage of him traveling the world and wandering around. He it's interesting because that idea, the idea of just traveling the world, is really appealing to me a little bit. But I would never be able to do it alone because I wouldn't know what the hell I was doing. But the idea that he's going on this little solo journey is pretty interesting to me, and they kind of there are short clips where he'll say something on a tour. He asks how tall Big Ben is, and I don't know, those little bits of personality there kind of help him become more sympathetic. Because, like I said, he's from the outset, he's a selfish character. He's abandoning his mother, you might say. So, like that, and helping the girl on the plane understand or feel better about turbulence. Those are little bits and pieces of personality that I like in the Cooper character. And I gotta say, the world traveler version of Cooper is a lot more likable than the one we get later, who is kind of in awe of the VR technology. I'll talk more about that later, but the world traveler Cooper is just a lot more likable. I like that he's wandering, and he gets kind of lonely. He sees a couple kissing in a cafe, so he loads up a dating app and meets Sonia, and they have some pretty good chemistry. I mean, it's not. I'm not in love with the relationship that they might have or something in that first scene, but it's effective in that, you know, it's leading to them hooking up, when that's as much of a connection as I need to find in the chemistry and between the characters. It's not until the morning after that I feel like they really click and seem to be more in tune with each other, and that's where their chemistry kind of grows on screen, is in that next day scene. Particularly when he picks up the book and asks her about the singularity, and I just love her response to it, where she says, "It's where computers learn to outsmart men like women did years ago." That is such an awesome line. I got a huge kick out of that. I loved it. And so we get the fun little chemistry-laden dialogue between Sonia and Cooper after they hook up, but then it takes a more somber turn as Cooper starts talking about his family and the stuff that he's leaving behind, and not leaving behind, but escaping from or postponing coming back to. And he talks about his father, and it's that rawness of him that in revealing that to Sonia and to us, he's opening up to us as well as an audience. It almost absolves him from the character sin of running from his family and avoiding his mother, because in a weird way, it makes us get behind him, because we see how vulnerable he is and how hard it's been for him. It's still selfish, and ultimately it's his downfall that he ignored his mother. But there's just a likability to that character, and the way that he opens up and is honest and straightforward about it to Sonia says a lot about the character and the fear that he has deep within him. And so there's a sequence where he loses his money. He essentially is his identity. An identity thief makes some charges on his account, and so he needs help getting a ticket home. So, I mean, that's kind of the impetus of the plot of the episode, much like how in Nosedive it was a big part of it was Lacey needs to be a 4.5 because she needs to get this apartment, and that's why she needs to go to the wedding. It's a not convenience, but it's a plot device for this episode in that Cooper needs money to go home. It's a simple plot device, and introducing the Odd Jobs app and finding the game tester listing is fine. I mean, it's fine. It's not needed to be any better than that. Although you would think, why would a major game developer need to post on that site? Although I guess we know going forward, once he gets there, why they would need the discretion of random people on the internet. And so he is brought into a freaking mansion where the game developer the game company is. And the score when he gets there is interesting. It's a little reminiscent of 80s horror movie music. That's how it felt, at least. Maybe I'm projecting onto it, but it was kind of the synthetic horror music type of sound, and I kind of dug it. But not as great as Nosedive's score, sadly, because Max Richter's work on that was really great. And I don't remember who did the score for this episode. Oh, yeah, it was Bear McCreary. Let's see. So he gets to the mansion, and I really like his little awkward jokes that don't land at all. He meets Katie, and he tries to make a little joke at the guy standing guard next to the door or standing by next to the door, whatever he's doing. But it's completely met with a stone reaction, and Katie doesn't engage him in the comedy aspect of it, or doesn't humor his comedic sensibilities, and that kind of really brought out the awkwardness of the situation and how uncomfortable, not necessarily uncomfortable, but just out of his element that Cooper is at that time. The way that he awkwardly jokes is, and they don't land, that helps humanize him a little more. It makes you kind of sympathize with him. And also, it's kind of cool because when they first walk in the door, there's a guy walking from the back of the room to the foreground, and his shirt is a very prominent design on the shirt is a big spider. So I thought that was a nice touch as well. So he's brought into a room where he has to sign a release, and also Sonia has asked him to take a picture, because if he takes a picture of anything that they're working on, he could get a ton of money, and he is, pretty strapped now. So he's left alone because there's a snafu on the forums, and he takes a picture of the suitcase that they brought in. And it's worth mentioning that there is a White Bear logo on the design of the plates that they put down for the Gopher or the Whack-A-Mole game. And this is as good a time as any to talk about the technology in this episode and the concepts surrounding them. So this episode revolves around video games, and that's great. Currently in the world of video games, VR gaming is kind of becoming more of a consumer thing. It's making some waves. I'm not like as in touch with the gaming community as I was like a decade ago, but I know that VR gaming is a big deal right now. And seeing it kind of propelled forward in this episode is really interesting and really kind of fascinating. This is a device that they put at the base of your spine, so that you can see in 3 dimensions things surrounding you, and that's a really interesting device to have games in. And it's something that I think would be freaking awesome if it actually came true at some point, but it seems a little implausible. I don't know how they would work out the logistics of that, but it's really a good something that this episode of Black Mirror does really well is it creates a technology that seems really appealing while also flipping it and making it terrifying. Or fairly scary. I don't know if I would say terrifying per se, but terrifying for Cooper for sure. So he does his Whack-A-Mole game after taking a picture of the thing and his mom calling and interrupting it for a moment. But he plays his Whack-A-Mole game, and then he's introduced to kind of the head of the game company. And in that scene, there is a really cool moment, or there's a really cool scene where the president of the company is telling him about, or asking him why video games are so popular. Essentially, he's asking why do you feel good when you play video games? And they have this discussion about how it's an adrenaline rush because you've faced you faced a fear or you faced a situation that you could have died in because you're involved with the story in the game and you're absorbed in it. And that's the setup for this, and that the actual game test or the play test of this is that he's going to be put into a mansion and this game is going to adjust to his deepest fears and try to terrify him. And as a concept for a survival horror game, holy crap, this is kind of astounding. This would be really cool if it was, a real thing. But I don't think I would sign up to test it because, yeah. So the concept of it's really cool, but also it kind of gives me pause about it because my line of thinking is that the rules of the episode and the logic of the episode follow that Cooper got up, took the picture, and then set his phone down, and then got back in the chair. And then when Katie came back in, she started administering the game, uploading it, and that's when Cooper's mother called on the phone that should have been turned off. And in 0.04 seconds, Cooper's dead. So at that time, he doesn't necessarily know exactly the extent of the game, of the gaming and the information and everything, which now that I'm saying it out loud, I'll waffle back and forth, but he doesn't know the scale of the game. So essentially, by the rules of the episode itself that it sets out, and by the end of it, my hang-up is that if he's already dead, then none of what's going on is real. He never goes in and speaks to the president of the company. He never has a conversation about how there's a survival horror game that is going to feed off of your fears and adjust to what you fear and everything. So my hang-up is if he's... One of the best things about Black Mirror is that it takes technology a step further, like 4 steps further than what we have today, and puts it into its stories. But this is more of a mental exercise in that Cooper just imagines all of this detail in 0.04 seconds, and it left me feeling a little hollow and incomplete. But now that I said that out loud, the game, as it's uploading, could have faltered, and he could have just gotten all of that information in his head in that 0.04 seconds, and that could have been sufficient to make his last moments or his last imaginings as vivid and filled out as they were and as accurate. So what do I know? So as the survival horror aspect of it starts, I love the concept of essentially a haunted house with a VR implant. And the fact that it will learn his fears and get progressively more scary is really clever. And furthermore, I like that Katie becomes essentially an AI voice in a video game. Like, she is the kind of controlling entity of the video game that Cooper's in. I thought that was a really, really nice touch, and that was a good nod to video gaming in general. I thought that was pretty cool. Having said that, though, I'm not too sure about the pacing of the episode. At this point, when he gets to the house, we're halfway through the episode. It's almost the exact halfway mark, and it left me feeling like it was taking kind of long, because we're about 25 minutes into the episode when we're introduced to the concept of this really high concept video game experience that is going to be learning and adjusting as it tries to, torture him by fear. So since it's halfway through the episode, we don't really get a lot of time to really build that up and explore that concept as fully as I think it could have if it happened earlier. Now, the sacrifice of that, or the by having it at the halfway point, if they were to extend that into the first or second third of the movie, or quarter of the movie, then that would have sacrificed all the character development that went into that first half of the episode. It would have sacrificed the setup of, potentially sacrificed the setup of him losing his money and needing the money from the job. It would have sacrificed some of his backstory about his father and his family. So it's a give and take there, and it's not ruinous that we're halfway through the episode when the survival horror stuff starts, but it still makes me wish that we would have had more time to explore it a little more. And I've already talked about some of the things that hint at what's going to happen later, or foreshadowing instances later. But the next one I want to point out is that he reads the Raven, as he's in the mansion, or in the house. And it's worth mentioning that because he met Sonia at a tavern that was called the Raven Inn. And so I think that's still some of his mind taking things that he's seen lately and thought about lately and attributing that into this world, because everything at this point forward is in his imagination. And even though I have my hangups about the pacing of the episode, and the placement of this segment of the episode, I really like the slow build of tension. First we get the spider, and I like that Katie kind of goads him into it, saying, like when he notices it, he doesn't say anything. And then she says that she noticed that he had a spike in his heart rate. And then that kind of brings him into that, creepy, scenario where he has to kill the spider. And then we get some little conventional horror elements, like the light fixture or the lamp next to him starts flickering. And then he sees a light in the painting of the mansion that he's in. And this section, or this element of the story, didn't really do anything for me. I thought it was kind of weird and out there, but a little moody and atmospheric. But overall, I thought that it was just, I could have lost it and it would have been fine. And then we get sounds throughout the house. And at this point, I kind of have a bone to pick with the Cooper character. He becomes kind of obnoxious to an extent. And this is what I was talking about when I said that World Traveler Cooper is a lot more relatable and likable than VR Cooper, because Cooper knows that he has this implant in his brain, or in the back of his neck, and he knows how it works. He's been told that it's gonna play on your fears, and it's going to create things. He knows that it can create 3-dimensional objects and mimic sounds and stuff. He knows all of these things, yet he doesn't. He's constantly assuming that everything is real. Like, it's not even are you guys doing this, or is this the game thing? It's not a conflict of that. It's just the house is settling or something, or the pipes are creaking or something. And it's just like, you don't need that when you have this setup. Like, have him question whether or not it's real rather than trying to prove to himself that it's real. I thought that was kind of a misstep on the writing of the episode, but also I guess I can see the other side of it, and that it makes sense that he would try to persuade himself that yes, those were creepy floorboards or something, but that it wasn't anything there. He's trying to comfort himself, so I can accept that. But I don't know, it just got kind of overbearing for a little bit. And then he gets kind of obnoxious when the apparition or the figment of his imagination manifests itself as his bully from high school. Like, it's not, I don't know, he gets kind of just obnoxious and weird, and I didn't like it. I wasn't a fan of that. It was a little bit overboard. And I respect that Wyatt Russell had a lot on his plate, because it's really hard to carry most of an episode by yourself. And for the most part, he did an admirable job. But in that scene, it just felt just a little bit overboard. I wasn't crazy about it. However, I do love the reveal of the giant spider bully hybrid creature. And that goes back to the slow building tension working really well, because you have all of these little pieces here and there. It's slowly building toward that moment, and that buildup is undercut by Cooper saying he's going to be right behind the cabinet door when he closes it, the cupboard door when he closes it, because he understands how horror movies work. He understands horror conventions. And I love that he says jump scares are getting pretty old, and then he screams because he sees a monster of a spider with the face of his bully. And it's just it's beautiful. I loved that moment, and I thought that it was particularly awesome because by being aware of the scare tactics and general horror elements of an environment, by being aware of it, he can say, yeah, he's going to be right behind me or right next to me when I close this cupboard. So since he's aware, his mind will conjure up something different. So he is playing a trick on himself, and he himself doesn't realize it, because it's like 3 levels of Inception for that to make sense. And then after we have an extended sequence of Cooper in the house by himself, we get Sonia knocking on the door. And introducing her into the picture is a nice twist in the story. And I like that we aren't clear as to whether or not she's real right from the outset, because we get the misdirect of him being able to physically touch her. So we get that kind of mislead where it's like, oh yeah, she really is real because I can feel her. And then it goes to hell. And I think that by the way that they did it, I think that they successfully sell her as a real person in that scene, because it kind of takes on the idea that at that point we have the standard survival horror set up and build up. So it kind of makes sense that they would usher into another act where maybe they need to escape the house because he's under attack or something, or he's not safe, as she says. And I like that because the haunted house portion, it wasn't necessarily getting old, but there wasn't much left for them to do with it without it getting really tired and repetitive and boring. And again, he tricks himself up. He trips himself up mentally because he asks Sonia how he found her, or how she found him. And she goes through a spiel saying that I looked on your phone and did all this and blah, blah, blah. So she gives what sound like valid reasons, and then he finds ways to question those reasons. Like, well, no, you couldn't have gotten to my phone because they took my phone when they brought me here, and it's like a mile away. And then she gives another reason, and I like that because, again, it's his mind trying to trick itself. He is having a conversation with himself, and he is thinking logically and thinking rationally about how she could possibly be there. He's already convinced himself that she's real, and so now he's trying to think of how she got there, and he's trying to follow the logic of it. But as he pokes holes in it, she becomes more of a malevolent force to him, and that's when you get the faux reveal that she planted the idea of doing the game test, and that she's the one that stole his money, and that she orchestrated everything. It's all a manifestation of his brain, and I think that that's a really clever way to introduce an antagonist for as brief a time as she's in it. It's a really clever concept within the context of this episode. And then when she attacks him, it becomes a different kind of horror movie almost entirely. It's like a slasher or home invasion movie or episode or story. I don't know. But I really like that element of it. And I think that was really cool and really wise of them to switch up the type of horror that they were telling. Because, again, it could have gotten tired if they kept hitting the haunted house motif more, and it overstayed its welcome. And this also introduces that he can feel pain, which is big. It's huge because it's a game changer, really. But I wish they would have established that earlier and ran with it a little longer. Like, I wish that when he got to the mansion or into the mansion and when it started, I wish that they could have realized that he could feel pain, or that the technology is so powerful that he can actually feel pain or trick himself into feeling pain. But they didn't, and again, I'm gonna waffle here again because it makes sense that they wouldn't, because it's more of a natural progression or a natural build up to it. If they wait until that moment to reveal that he can feel pain. But I'd like to think that there's a way that they could have set it up earlier and made it fit within the construct of the episode. However, again, waffling, but I suppose that would have turned it into a different type of episode entirely and thrown it deeper into a horror story than it really needs to be. And I didn't mention this, but the whole time, Katie's voice has not been in his ear. The connection has been cut off. And what I noticed the second time I watched it is that immediately when the voice comes back, Katie says, "We've been talking, but you haven't responded." And of course, that could corroborate the fact that that could be because the audio or the feed did cut out and they haven't had contact. But I kind of like thinking that the break in the connection was actually a manifestation of his mind with the mushroom on the back of his neck. I like to think that it was like the technology, the mushroom has created or has blocked sound from him. I would like to believe that, because I think that would be pretty cool concept. And I also like that, given that the Demon Sonia excursion just happened, that when Katie's voice comes back, we can't trust it. We cannot trust a single thing, because the rules of this episode, the rules of the story, have been broken by Sonia. And I didn't mention the fight that they have, but I mean, it was brutal. It was like the second that she plunged the knife into him, it was intense. I liked it. And I liked that it was the same spot where the bully injured him, because that shows that he has that in his mind. And so why not replicate it at that point? Because he has that memory at the forefront of his mind. So it'd probably be easier to get the pain in there too. And then I have another gripe that's coming up here, is like Cooper gets agitated. He freaks out. He says the safe word. He says stop to bring him out of the game, which is cool. That it makes sense. Obviously, you would do that too. But Katie tells him that he needs to make it to the access point, and we need you to follow instructions and make it to the access point. That's what she says, and I love that, because it's such a video game thing. It's such a video game concept. But again, I wish this was all earlier, and I wish it had more time to breathe, because she says that, and then he kind of scoffs at it a little bit, but then we cut to him like at the bottom of a set of stairs, and he says, "Oh, more stairs." It's like, so he's already done all of these things, and I wish that was a bigger part of the story, is that he's having to go through all of these checkpoints to get to the access point to end the nightmare and end the game. I don't know. It would have been more of a video game thing than anything. And there's a nice BioShock reference there when he goes into the room. And then she says, "We brought you up here to see if we've broken you enough to have you follow instructions blindly." And at that moment, it's kind of cool to think that that's not Katie, that's the game talking. And the realization that the game is stealing his memories and making him lose himself at that moment, because he starts to realize that he's forgetting everything. The voice is taunting him, asking him what his mother looks like, and asking him a ton of questions. Where have you been? Where do you live? What's your address? All that stuff. And then that's when he starts to realize that he is losing himself in this, and he's losing his memory. His worst fear, his absolute worst fear, is coming to life. And as many criticisms as I had about Wyatt Russell's performance as being kind of obnoxious in the early stages of this section of the episode, he does a really fantastic job here of freaking out, being terrified that he's losing his memory while also being confused and overwhelmed with confusion and fear. And when he starts screaming, "Get it out of my head, get it out of my head, get it out of my head," and then saying to Katie after they've rushed into the room and everything, saying, "I don't know who I am," it's so hard to see, because he's like a child. He's lost. He's listless. He's distant and lost, and it's really painful to see. And it really, that's something that's going to stick with me for a while. Then we get this fake reveal that the game is too powerful. It's deeply rooted into his brain, and they can't take it out. They can't take out the mushroom. They can't save his memory because it has tendrils that have gone into his brain, dug into his brain, and made a home there. And then he's dragged away, and the owner of the company says to put him with the others, or something to that effect. And the scene ends with him yelling "stop." And I think that would have been a really incredible ending if that was the end of the episode. Like, I think that would have worked really, really well. And that would have been a really strong ending. Even after that, when he wakes up in the chair, immediately after that, they've taken him out of the VR game and he's still in the chair in the office. That would have worked well as a strong ending as well. And it would have alleviated the fake out that we got. But then we wouldn't get the scene with his mother, which that scene is beyond chilling. And it's so tragic and sad and depressing and terrifying, and that kind of makes everything. It's really effective. I'll say that it's really effective, and they could have sold it as he was released from them, and but the games really did have a lasting effect on him, and the game stayed in his brain, and they really couldn't take it out. So he's seeing all of these, like when he goes home, that's not really his mother. He's just seeing his worst fear of it, and that could have played into his line earlier where he says that he doesn't know how to talk to her. I think that would have been pretty cool, but instead we get the real ending. And before I get to that, actually, the fact that when she keeps saying she has to call Cooper to make sure he's safe, like that scene, that's just going to stick with me for a while. It's really chilling. But then we get the real ending, and the real ending is that the phone went off, his mother called, and it interfered with the equipment, and he died 0.04 seconds after the first time he was uploaded to the VR game, which I have warmed up to. I'm warming up to that ending. It wasn't quite what I wanted the first time, but I see the merit in it. But it's just not. I think the run up to it, where you get all of these different really confusing and out there sequences in the lead up to it, I think that kind of keeps it from having from me liking it, at least, because it seems a little busy at the end. But overall, it was a really strong episode. It was a strong second episode of this third season, and I guess I'll go into my closing thoughts. This episode of Black Mirror, it feels like the show is kind of dipping its toes into the horror genre, and it feels like it's just playing with horror a little bit, which I really enjoy, and there's nothing wrong with that. The visual effects of the monsters and the creatures and Cooper that Cooper encounters in the house are pretty well done. They're really well done because, like I said, they have that Netflix money, and it's also really effective. Like the jump scares and the the moody atmosphere is really solid and makes for a pretty entertaining horror section of the episode. But the episode works best in Cooper's deep-seated fear about his father. And I kind of wish, like, while I wish that this episode got to the horror elements faster, I can't deny that the scene with his mother was something that it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna stick with me for a while. It's really well done. And I've made my peace, I think, about the way that technology is used in this episode. And while it is still a figment of Cooper's imagination, in those 0.04 seconds, it also makes sense that maybe he has, since the information is being uploaded to his brain, that maybe he does have access to some of the plans for the gaming company and for the owner of the company and for what they want out of the survival horror genre in their new game. So I guess my hang up with that is that it was, if it's true that he imagined it in his brain, then it makes sense that it would be connected to the game itself. So I've made my peace with it, is what I'm trying to say. And overall, I think that it tracks pretty well, even though I'm still on the fence about the final ending. It tracks well. I like how tight the script is in leading up to that reveal. We have a running reference to Cooper's mom calling. We have a dark secret or dark history, or just a painful history that he's running away from. We have him sneaking a picture, and that feels like something that he would do given what we know about him so far. And moreover, there's an important reason, or a good reason, for him to take the picture, because it'll get him money, it'll get him home, or it'll get him, out of a bind. And the episode altogether it's put together really well. Dan Trachtenberg did a great job, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does in the future. I just wish that the ending of this episode, the ending reveal, didn't have such a potentially negative effect on most of the second half of the episode for me. Or maybe negative effect is too harsh a term. Maybe it's more that it makes me rethink the second half of the episode. And that's not something I really want to do. I want to be along for the ride, and I want to trust that they're going to get me to where I need to go for this, in their stories. But, overall, I enjoyed Playtest. I thought that it was a really, a strong second episode, essentially. But it, and even though the emotion of his fear about his mother and his father and about his family, even though the emotion of that fear was sold really well, the whole package of the episode still didn't quite do it for me. It's kind of the same thing I had a problem with Nosedive. It just seems, something about it just seems not as impactful as I want it to be. It's not a visceral experience for me. The scene with the mother and some of the scenes involving his history and everything, those stand alone as strong moments in the episode, but as a complete narrative altogether, it doesn't really gel with me the way that I would like it to. So, maybe my appreciation for this and Nosedive will grow the more I rewatch these episodes. But as of right now, there's nothing inherently wrong with them. They're not bad episodes. They're really, really good episodes, but they haven't transcended what I know Black Mirror is capable of, or in the way that I know Black Mirror is capable of. So that'll do it for my review of Playtest. And before I end the podcast, I'm going to go ahead and read a couple excerpts from Charlie Brooker and Annabelle Jones's Reddit AMA from a little while ago. And these two pertain a bit to Playtest, and I thought I'd go ahead and read them in this episode. So the question was, I was wondering if you ever thought about fucking up with the audience. Like having different ends or scenes depending on the day of the week someone is watching, or maybe deleting scenes after a few days and watching people freaking out about it on Twitter. And he said, have thought about that with Playtest, wanted to do a nightmare mode for people watching it a second time with different fourth wall breaking scenes, but it was just too logistically complicated. We may revisit the idea though. And, man, I hope that they do. I really hope that they find a way to do that, because I think it would be really cool. That would be so cool to have different versions of the episode playing at random, and just I think that would be really cool. And then the next question was, what was it like working with Dan Trachtenberg? And he said he is a monster. No, he's fantastic, really fun guy, actually geekier about video games than any of us. He insisted on the BioShock reference, for instance, and we fed him loads of Dairy Milk Oreo bars, so he owes us. So I like that. I enjoyed that. And yeah, closing thought is actually, it's funny because the Reddit username that Charlie Brooker and Annabelle are using used in the AMA is just the username is call your mum, and I thought that was that's pretty awesome. So all right, well, that is going to do it for this week's bonus episode of Anthology. Once again, like I said last time, I'm currently, if you listen to the main feed or the main episodes of Anthology, I'm closing in on the end of season 1 of The Twilight Zone. So if you have any favorite episodes, moments, endings, or least favorite episodes, moments, endings, email them in and let me know from season 1 of The Twilight Zone, and I'm compiling them and I'm gonna read them in my season 1 wrap-up episode at the end of December. So do check that out, and if you haven't already, please leave me a rating and review on iTunes. And that about does it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more episodes at AnthologyPod.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast app. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. The more reviews I get, the higher the show will be ranked in iTunes search results, making it easier for people to discover it and grow the podcast. Of course, you can always email me your thoughts and feelings about the show to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. You can also tweet me at obsessiveviewer, like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, or you can call and leave me a voicemail at 317-762-6099 for a chance to have it played on the show. If you like what you've heard here, I urge you to check out The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast I host with my friends Mike and Tiny. Also check out the Obsessive Viewer blog at obsessiveviewer.com, where I write movie reviews, TV reviews, and the occasional editorial about the business of entertainment. If you want even more obsessive content in your life, subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer subreddit at r/obsessiveviewer, and check out obsessivebooknerd.com, our sister site for book reviews, author spotlights, and a general celebration of reading. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out my friend Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.